Welcome back to part 2 of the Thunderbird brake booster rebuild. Carrying straight on from part 1, where we had just taken out the piston assembly. In front of us we had the two halves of the casing, which are now all squeaky clean. Got rid of all that brake fluid and some of the rust. We can now turn our attention to the piston assembly. As you can see, I have two piston assemblies. One which has the split diaphragm that has just come out of the car. This other one has come from an old booster which was in the car when I first bought it. That booster never worked, which was due to the fact that the casing had corroded and would never seal. The diaphragm, however, looks in really good shape. But I don't think the return spring is working as it should, so I'll salvage the diaphragm and fit to all the other components that I know work, essentially trying to make one good piston assembly from two broken ones. So first we need to separate the diaphragm from the rest of the components. To do that we'll have to remove the spring clip, which can compress using these holes. With the spring clip free, we can slide off the inner diaphragm. She's a little rusty. Off comes the shaft that goes through to the master cylinder. And there's the return spring, which doesn't look all that clever. The return spring operates similar to a pressure plate on a clutch. Out comes the spring mechanism. And there we have our diaphragm. I've gone ahead and disassembled the other piston assembly and laid all the parts out next to each other. You can see the need to take everything apart. If we take our shaft that protrudes into the master cylinder, you can see the bore on the back side is clear. The spring assembly all appears to be in good shape. Nice and clean. All the rubbers look good too. Our other spring assembly, however, tells a different story. The centre shaft seems to have sheared off. I imagine it became weak under corrosion. Oh, and there's the other half of it, stuck inside there. I somewhat doubt that's ever going to be functional. Closer look at the diaphragm, which will be going in. All appears to be okay. And that is all the parts that make up the piston assembly. Now to put it all back together. I'll start by sliding in the spring assembly. Make sure that it is all aligned correctly. The shaft slides over the top, followed by the inner diaphragm, then the retainer clip. This is going to be fun to try and get back in there. Now the piston assembly is back together, it can be put back into the casing. I've removed the rubber boot from the back of the piston so I can grease the shaft, and will make it easier to slide the piston into the back plate of the casing. Now the piston is in, I've put the rubber boot back on, and I can now connect the link rods using the clevis pin and spring clip. The spring clip can be a tad fiddly, but it's important that it seats correctly into the groove machined into the pin. If it doesn't, it won't retain the pin, meaning it could slide out. If the pin was to come loose, the brake pedal would effectively become disconnected from the rest of the system, which would certainly be less than ideal. With the back half of the booster assembled, I can now fit the front half. Just pulling in the inner diaphragm through and making sure it seats properly. Wouldn't want it to leak after all of this. In goes the screws. Now that's together, I just need to fit the plastic spacers. I'll give it a quick clean before I fit it. Make sure it's the right way around so it seats correctly. Now the brake booster is complete, it's ready to fit back into the car. Connecting the vacuum line back up. That's the booster back in. Off camera, I once again buried my head under the dash to fit the booster against the firewall and reconnect the brake pedal. Time now to fit the master cylinder. Back over at the bench, I've got the old master cylinder with the brake light switch, which I need to transfer to the new master cylinder. Just carefully unwind the... Oh bloody hell, where did that go? After eventually finding the switch, we can now carry on. Out comes the plug. And in goes the switch. Now the master cylinder can go back in. Now that's fitted, just requires topping up. Careful not to spill the brake fluid, as it will make a mess of your paint. On goes the cap. Just a quick look for any obvious leaks in which we appear to be okay. We won't know for certain until the brakes are operated a few times to get the system under pressure. Now to connect the brake light switch back up. And last but not least, the strut brace to be bolted back in. Now that everything is assembled back together, hopefully correctly, there's one last job that remains, and that's to bleed the brakes. Because the master cylinder has been removed, it will allow plenty of air to get into the system, which we need to get out. As it is the master cylinder that has been removed, I'll need to bleed the brakes at all 4 wheels, starting with the wheel furthest away. I'll need to work my way back via the second furthest wheel, and so on, saving the closest wheel to the master cylinder last. So here's the bleed nipple on the rear wheel cylinder that I need to connect to. So I've got my bleed device hooked up, and I'm hopefully pulling fluid and air bubbles out of the system. I'll have to repeat this for all 4 wheels in total. Let's just take a closer look at how I connect everything and how I actually bleed the brakes. I'll use this bleed nipple on the front passenger side wheel as an example. First comes off the rubber cap. Then I just crack open the bleed nipple. Normally only needs a 1/4 to half a turn. There's no need to remove it completely. The pipe goes on, just pushes over the barb. Now that's all connected, we can start bleeding the brakes. I have this nifty little gadget connected to an airline. This is going to draw out the fluid. You don't need the airline. The same results can be achieved with any piece of pipe and a bottle. This just saves me having to pump the brake pedal. I'm going to let this continue to draw brake fluid until I get a continuous flow of fluid along the pipe without any air bubbles. It's important to watch the master cylinder and make sure that it doesn't run out of fluid. If it does, air will follow in and defeat the whole point of bleeding the brakes. After bleeding, I'll just need to give the pedal a few pumps to check it feels nice and firm, and then I'll check again for any obvious leaks. Well, after a quick spin around the block, it appears everything seems to be in working order, so I'll call that a great success. Can't say it always works out that way, but on this occasion I'll take the win. Now for some well-earned tea and biscuits. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope to see you again soon for some more tinkering, as there is plenty to do on this car and some of my other cars. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.